Is anyone here? Oh, there you are. Hi.
Oh, here I am.
I was like, I thought it was just people turned it on, but
Yes.
sorry that I didn't see the link. I didn't know if I missed it or if it just got sent out.
Yeah. So you were able to find it?
No, it just arrived like right after. Did you just send it?
No, I sent it earlier today, a couple hours ago. And I just sent it again. But glad you found it.
Hi.
Hi, Sonia.
Hello.
Great, thank you.
I'm going to keep out an eye out on the email, make sure that Chief Odie and Escalante.
My video is unstable. I'll turn it on for a second, but it kept going and out, so I'm keeping it off if that's okay.
Yes. I'll make sure.
So I have to present, like I said, at the board meeting at 6:30.
So we'll the meeting along.
Huh? Yeah. And so I want to leave here by 6:15 so I can drive down there without getting a speeding ticket.
That sounds good.
Bernie's going to be waiting out behind my car to give me a speeding ticket. All right. Well,
recording in progress.
I thought I saw Rob was here, but now I'm not seeing him.
Jump back on again. Let me try to start this recording real quick. Here.
Well, should we get started and he can join in? Because there's a couple.
Rob sent me an email or sent an email and said that his link or something needs to be resent.
Yeah, it was resent earlier. Hopefully that link works.
Okay.
Looks like. Give me a minute to do this whole technology here. Okay. Let me try to. Okay, let's try this again for Rob. Hopefully that will work. All right, I see Rob on.
All right.
And I will. All right. All right, Chief Odie is on now. All right, so we're good to go.
All right, so I think at the time is 4:04. We'll call the meeting to order and we'll start with roll call.
All right, Commissioner Watkins, absent. Commissioner Golder.
Here.
And Commissioner Bruner.
Present.
Thank you.
So now is time for oral communications. If there's any attendees that would like to address the group, you can do so by pressing *9 or the raise hand feature on your Zoom link. Let's wait a second to see if anybody has any oral communications. Okay.
I see none on TV today.
So let's move on. I'm looking for a motion to approve the minutes from September 26th and November 30th. And that'll have to be Sonia, since there's only two of us.
I read through the minutes, but I wasn't present for those.
Okay.
Corrections, additions, or changes. So I abstain.
Okay. Well, then I don't know what we can do since
That's good point. I can add this to the next agenda.
add it to the notes. But I would say if I can move and vote, and it would just be me, but maybe we can figure that out in the meantime. All right. So we're going to move on to item 3 and under general business, our annual fire emergency services report from 2022. And I'm going to hand it over to Chief Odie.
All right. Thank you, council member. You guys can all hear me?
Yes.
All right. That's the first test that I passed. Actually, I failed the first one, which was logging in. Let me go for the final exam, which is share my screen.
All right. Do you want to need to share? Okay, you're good.
Am I good?
Yes.
All right.
Hey, we can see it.
Cool. All right. I'll just jump right in. And then if at any time you guys have any questions, feel free. But of course, at the end, I've got a slide dedicated to questions, and I've got a tremendous amount of data to sort of help answer any of those questions that you guys have. So I'll go ahead and jump right in to our 2022 annual report for the fire department. Let's see. Really quick, the items that we will cover are our various divisions, primarily fire operations, fire investigations, fire prevention, open space fires for obvious reasons, vegetation management programs to fortify safety in our open spaces, as well as an overview of our FireWise program and our efforts to expand and grow that program. And then, of course, any and all steps moving forward for the fire department. So to start off with fire operations, last year, 2022, we ran a total of 9,611 calls. That's, including fire, EMS, rescues, water rescues. We kind of have a little bit of a breakdown here. So over 5,000 were EMS, and that's pretty much the standard in the industry. Primarily for fire departments, our bread and butter is those emergency medical responses. Within the city, in last year, we had 297 fires. And while that seems like an extremely large number, of the 297, 107 were actual structure fires, so buildings, whether it's residential or commercial. 144 were wildland. And again, those aren't, the big headline grabber wildland fires, but these can be anything from a quarter of an acre, up to 10 to multiple acres beyond. And that's anywhere within the city. And the other fires that you'll see listed here, those include, vehicle fires, trash can fires, nuisance fires. So that sort of encompasses that total of 297. Another big component to our operations is water rescues. And so we had 25 of those. And again, those are sort of within the city proper, the beach and Westcliff, but that also extends, our mutual aid throughout the county. And up the coast, basically to county line is where we sort of our sphere of influence when it comes to water rescue. We had 319 vehicle accidents that we responded to within the city, and of course the travel corridors of Highway 17 and Highway 1. And then with that, 112 hazardous material incidents. Those again run the gamut of a simple gas or oil leak, or can include something much larger, which can be sort of much more caustic or noxious chemical. But they aren't super common here. But again, to summarize, we had 112 hazmat incidents. Moving on to fire investigations, we had 49 total call outs. That's sort of where it goes beyond maybe the company officer and their training and expertise. And so they call out our on-call fire investigator. Sometimes this may be just a over the phone consult, or it may actually escalate to where we actually have somebody come out and dig through a fire scene to gather additional information for reporting purposes. We had 448 criminal cases that we worked with PD on. Those included, as severe as arson and then negligent burning. We had 22 arrests. And again, 8 were for the misdemeanor negligent burning, which was sort of a new addition over the last couple of years. We had 14 felony arsons. So far, I've had 4 convictions, 2 no files, which is where the DA has decided for whatever reason there's not enough evidence. And so they opt to not follow through with that. And we still have 8 pending trial. And again, a lot of these are done with just 2 fire investigators that we have. And then we do get some support on our line from our shift fire investigators and fire investigation program. Again, for some context, the basis when you look at arson versus negligent burning, the big difference there is intent. Was someone just being negligent and not using their best judgment, or were they actually trying to cause harm to person or property? And so there's the distinction between arson and negligent burning. And so you can kind of see some of the challenges for a DA to go ahead and follow through with pressing charges and some of those instances, because we need to prove that intent. And then, of course, we continued by participating in our Santa Cruz County Fire Investigation Task Force, which this fire department over the last 2 years has been instrumental in resurrecting. That's through the Santa Cruz County Fire Chiefs Association. And what this is basically all the fire departments participating in a task force where we sort of assist each other in some of the larger out of the ordinary type calls. And so this last year, we had 5 county joint investigations, and these can be, based on dollar loss. In a couple cases, we did have some fatalities. We had a fatal fire in Boulder Creek. We also had an attempted murder that we assisted on in Live Oak. And then we had 2 in Hollister that we assisted with ATF, and those involved fatalities as well. So this is sort of, again, the additional work that our staff is doing to help enhance safety, not only within the city, but the county and the Tri-County area. And that's, like I said, we participate in that Tri-County, and that's between San Benito County and Monterey County. They have similar challenges in terms of making sure they have the staffing and the training available for the specific training needed for for fire investigation itself. Moving on to fire prevention, the backbone, if you will, preventing anything catastrophic. For the community and the firefighters, we had 256 construction inspections, 335 life safety inspections. Those include obviously apartments, schools, hotels, assemblies. That's any occupancy over 50 people. We did 105 outdoor inspections. You might notice there was a drop from the year even previous, and that was because during the pandemic, we did a lot of outdoor inspections of some outdoor restaurant and business expansions. This year, we've solely focused a lot on managed camps and some of our open spaces, because that still is a safety concern for us, both the community and the responders that are going out there. So we try and stay up on top of those outdoor inspections. 135 complaints. And again, that's people that call about high weeds. We obviously work in conjunction with the planning department's code enforcement. So we'll come out at their request if they have something specific that pertains to fire safety or egress. So we help in those as well. We did over 1,000 other contacts out there, again, working with the planning department on plan and project review, consultations with various developers and contractors. So again, one of the things that's big to point out is a lot of this work is being done currently with minimal staff over the last year. With my promotion to the fire chief position, we did freeze the division chief of prevention. And so we basically have a team of 2 out in the field with 1 admin staff dedicated to fire prevention. So all these numbers that you see here are done with a very limited staff. We do get some support by way of using some temporary inspectors that help us with some of our basic inspections. They're not life safety inspections, but they help us get sort of across the finish line, so to speak. They're 2 retired annuitants that actually used to work for PD. So their knowledge of code and of course their relationships with business owners and the community really is a benefit for us when we try and bridge that gap between staffing and the demand of the community. Something I always point out every single year, but I think it's important to note, especially graphically, as you can see, here's our community wildfire preparedness areas for the city. And that, in essence, is a giant horseshoe around the city, from Moore Creek to UCSC, Pogonip, all the way to De La and down to Arana Gulch. Those are the areas that we need to focus on in terms of our wildfire prevention plan. And so that's an ongoing effort that we do in the city with our staff in terms of our vegetation management program, our 5-year vegetation management plan, which I'll talk about in the next couple slides. And then, of course, our partnerships with parks, public works, and water in terms of all the various city assets and infrastructure that are located within these areas. I think it's important to note, not necessarily a heat map, but you'll sort of see the number of incidents that we had in relation to those open spaces and the city as a whole. The red is incidents that we had in 2022. And then, of course, the orange being the previous year. So a lot of similarities. But again, I think the biggest thing to take out of here is where we see a lot of those and where our concern is in that wildland urban interface. And that's really going to be on that Harvey West Pogonip Highway 9 corridor. And then, of course, you just see that the river levee itself, and a lot of that has to do, of course, the timeline corresponds with the operation of the benchlands at that time. And so you'll see a lot of overlap in terms of fire incidents in those areas. And these aren't your typical EMS calls, right? They don't line up. This is your actual logging an actual fire event that we went out and logged the data associated with these incidents. So again, just a sort of a visual representation of that challenge that we have in terms of protecting the city from the danger of fire. With that, you can kind of see a steady rise in open space fires over from 2017 was really when we started capturing this data. Last year, again, we sort of keep creeping up. We saw a little bit of a drop in 2021, but again, our challenge is, the education, the outreach, and then making sure that that's balanced with some of our vegetation management efforts, so that we're sort of creating that buffer to make sure that any fires that do start are slow in progress so that we can locate them quickly and then obviously mitigate any hazards in a timely fashion. I think it's important to note that this is not just specific to the city. This is the state of California, and I would hazard to say throughout the country, but all fires pretty much in the open spaces are human caused. You have the very rare occurrence of a lightning strike, which we saw with CZU, but for the most part, the ones that you saw on that heat map that I showed earlier are really all due to the fact human activity out in these areas. Obviously, last year and throughout the last few years, we have expanded wildfire season. I think CAL FIRE's approach has really all year long they call it a wildland year. And that's just due to the fact that we're seeing increased temperatures. The drought conditions haven't helped. That has yet to be determined for this year with the extreme amount of rain that we got in November, December, and January. And so hopefully with the approaching system that we have over the next couple of days, and we can maintain that, maybe we'll see that fire season shorten just a bit. But again, it just allows us to be prepared for that season. Again, whether it's the fire suppression activities and training revolving around that, or some of our prevention activities like the vegetation management. And we do that all in partnership with our other local fire partners like CAL FIRE, Central Fire, Scotts Valley. Really, it's an all hands effort in terms of wildfire prevention in the county. Another partnership that we have been for a long time now, have aggressive enforcement efforts between ourselves and the police department. It takes a lot of coordination on the back end to make sure that park staff, fire staff are supported and safe. That's always going to be a challenge for us with that environment out in the open space. But again, we've had really good relationship with PD, and they've helped us in terms of enforcing these. And we've also had that cooperation on the back end with the city attorney's office in terms of enforcing some of this negligent burning activity and even in some cases getting some stay away orders so that those folks that are repeat offenders are not continuing to expose the community to some of these repeated fire hazards. Last year, unlike other years, we did not close any of the city open spaces. I think, a lot of times in the past, people sort of came to expect that. This was my last year was my first time sort of at the helm, if you will. And I really wanted to be data driven, and I wanted to focus specifically on what the meteorologists and what the science was telling us in terms of our drought conditions and expected fire behavior. And so I was constantly checking the data with a bunch of different platforms. One of the biggest for the Northwest is located in Idaho, and I was getting lots of information on a weekly basis to sort of make that determination. And thankfully, last year we didn't have to get to that because it does put an added stress to our already limited resources in the city when we'd have to go and close those open spaces and, of course, enforce it. And then also it trickles down to those that are out there and already hampered by some of their situation. And so thankfully that didn't have to happen, but we will be mindful moving forward of following the data and the science to make sure that we are making sound decisions when it comes to closing open spaces. But one thing that won't change is we still have zero tolerance for illegal fires in open spaces. So our crews, when they respond out to smoke checks or the fear of fire in these areas, we'll again partner with PD or even in areas where it's a state park property, look to site for these illegal fires, especially during the high season when we're worried about the dry conditions and high winds. Moving on to some of the vegetation management programs that we have. So like I mentioned, a lot of these are a collaborative effort and have been and continue to grow by way of the partnerships we've created with Parks and Rec, as it is their property, sort of, in terms of their responsibility. We just sort of impart a lot of our expertise or knowledge and really focus on our ability to access the area quickly and also slow the spread of fire given the various types of environments that we're in, whether it's an open grassland or if we have some steep, heavily wooded areas. We're working cooperatively with park staff, the city arborist, and biologists to make sure we're sensitive to all those challenges in those areas. One of the projects, and it's one that we try and focus on at least every other year, is De La Viega. This last year, which we completed in June of 2022, was just under 10 acres. It was grant funded by the California Coastal Conservancy. Again, we create shaded fuel breaks. It's that break between sort of civilization, if you will, and the open space. And again, it's sort of those unintended sparks caused by humans in these areas that we're trying to slow the spread so they're easily detected and easily accessible by fire crews. Remove ladder fuels up at top of the world, or for those that are not familiar with that term, near the Frisbee golf course. And then North Branciforte and De La Viega Park Road, again, all those areas adjacent to the roads in those areas were thinned out as well to prevent rapid spread of fire. We also got a CAL FIRE grant, which was awarded in 2022 for work that will begin this year. Again, it focuses on, the term you've heard before, shaded fuel breaks, removes those ladder fuels. So if the fire's on the ground, it doesn't quickly communicate up into the canopy or into the trees themselves, to where they're much more influenced by the prevailing winds, and then of course spread a lot faster by way of ember casts, and of course just more available fuels in a tree canopy. And then of course our focus always is improving emergency access. And I think one thing that's important to point out is with our improved emergency access, you also have increased or improved access for the community to use our open spaces. And so people feel safe, it's more accessible. And so we have people that are out there, and they're actually the ones that report some of these smoke checks or fires. And so that early detection that I mentioned really occurs because of these projects. And then of course, the access is enhanced for us to get there. This particular grant will focus on the Highway 9 corridor up to the city limits. And then of course, we're also going to focus on Upper Moore Creek Preserve. And again, these are all projects identified in conjunction with the Parks Department. We're also awarded through the State Coastal Conservancy another grant that was awarded late last year, but will start this year. Again, for shaded fuel breaks, removing those ladder fuels, like I mentioned, and improving access. And that'll be in Pogonet Park, Upper Spring Trail. Harvey West Clubhouse Meadow, Arana Gulch, and it also allowed us to purchase a wood chipper so that all that work we're doing to remove these branches and duff along the ground can be chipped up. And depending on what the biologist and the arborist say, whether we can, do a cast of all the wood chips or if we have to remove them. So again, we're being really mindful of the environment and how we conduct this work. Here's a couple examples. The maps on the left just show those areas in red are highlighting where the work occurred. And then I think the best sort of way to describe this to folks is you have the photos, and of course you have the before and after, and you can sort of see we really try and focus on the exact same location to give you guys an impression of the true benefit of that work. So on the left, upper left, you see where there is that fire vehicle, thick underbrush, and you can actually see a great example of ladder fuels, where if a fire were to occur on the base of that road, it will quickly communicate up into that tree canopy and spread up. Heat rises, it'll move up that hill. If you look over to the right, you'll see where we've taken out that ladder fuel or that connection with the ground. And you can also see that in the bottom photos as well. So these are great examples of some of that work that we try and do. And again, it's kind of like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. We'll do this 1 year, and a couple of years later, we'll have to come back and do the same thing because, as we all know, vegetation grows. Another one that we have here that we mentioned is Moore Creek and Highway 9. This is going to be our focus moving forward this next year. As you can see, those areas we're focusing on and some of the fuel that we're trying to address. You can see how thick the brush is in that upper photo, and then just all the dead and dying debris that are just fuel to burn and also make it extremely difficult and dangerous for fire crews to access. Again, talking about that other large funding we got from the Coastal Conservancy, you can see from the red lines, the areas that we're going to treat. The one on the left is obviously the Harvey West area and Upper Spring Trail. You can see the other part of Pogonip that we're going to address in that lower meadow, and then of course Arana Gulch on the right. And again, these were areas that have been treated in years past, but again, by way of working with our partners, and the Coastal Conservancy and CAL FIRE, finding the funding to give us the ability to do this work along with parks staff. So again, focusing on FireWise, it's that sort of community watch, if you will, for the world of fire. It's a program through the National Fire Protection Association, teaches people how to live in that urban interface. We've been very successful with creating and curating relationships with our residents in these areas to really arm them with information and provide them the tools and training to sort of protect their homes and their neighborhoods. And we've had tremendous success with people just taking preventative measures to be safe during fire season, to the point that we've actually worked with Prospect Heights neighborhood with their success of providing them dumpsters that the fire department pays for, so that neighbors can go out and proactively trim a lot of their ladder fuels and sort of make their specific property more fire safe, as well as providing them information on emergency preparedness and emergency evacuation if necessary. So this is sort of our conduit to the community when it comes to fire safety. We focus on teaching people that live in the urban interfaces about the home ignition zones. Here's some examples of your immediate, intermediate, and extended zones. Most of us in the city live in the realm of immediate and intermediate because, for those of us to have 100 feet from our homes is not very common. But again, we have those. And so we'll work with those homeowners to make sure that they are equally as prepared in the event of a wildland fire. Like I mentioned, city has 3 active. The most successful or longest standing, and actually the first in the county, like I've mentioned before, is Prospect Heights. And then, of course, we have another one that is just as successful and growing and expanding, I think, at a rapid rate, and that is the Highland Hillcrest area on the west side. And they just have been great partners with us in terms of getting that message out and being a great conduit and partner for the fire department in terms of keeping our urban interface areas safe. Things that we're looking for in the future is, as I mentioned, vegetation management is a marathon, not a sprint. We will continue to work on this every single year and with our partners. We're going to obviously dedicate risk and liability funds towards this effort. This is done with Fire and Parks and Rec as partners. clear emergency access trails and roads. It's not just the roads to get the fire equipment in there, but it's our ability to get people in there as well. We're going to continue to create and maintain those shaded fuel breaks. We're currently working with and did get some funding for a 5-year vegetation management plan, which is sort of our long-term strategic plan, if you will, when it comes to the city's open spaces and our critical infrastructure. And for those that, it's hard to sort of picture, but we have so many water tanks on the west side, and we have radio infrastructure for the county radio. We have our dispatch center up at De La Viega Park. So there's quite a few areas up the coast that both public works, water, parks, and fire rely so heavily on, even PD, in terms of our radio communications. And so this vegetation management plan is for all open spaces and infrastructure, and is collaboration between fire, parks, public works, and water. So it's some great work that's come out so far, and we're just looking forward to finalizing that plan and, of course, sharing that with you in the future. We'll continue to provide regular maintenance of established fuel breaks, continue to partner with water and parks to share funding, personnel, and equipment. A past example was the large masticator head that we put on some heavy equipment that actually will do some heavy equipment work with one operator. And the water department has used that up at Loch Lomond. So there's an example of us collaborating, sharing funding, and sharing personnel to affect these projects. And then, of course, we're going to continue our outreach efforts with the neighborhood groups to expand that sort of Firewise influence, if you will. And as we have emerged from COVID, one of the goals I've given to my staff is we're going to really try and ramp up our public education and outreach and consultations with homeowners. But I think we get our best bang for our buck when we do it with large neighborhood groups or homeowners associations. So now that we can do it safely, and it's much more effective to do it in person, we're going to start ramping that up in the coming year. Obviously, it's just been hampered by way of the people's comfort level and, of course, the pandemic. So with that, that's sort of the presentation that I have, but I am open to any and all questions that you guys may have based on my presentation or anything else that may be out there.
Thank you so much, Chief Odie. Sonia, do you have any questions?
Yes, I have a couple. Should I?
Okay. Yeah, you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you. And again, I'm sorry, my video has been unstable here where I'm at. So thank you for all of that information. As a new member of this committee, Public Safety Committee, I'm really excited to be on this committee and to read through all of the information that was provided, and appreciate all the breakdown of the categories that you provided, which was really helpful in seeing some of the responses and some of the work, especially under fire. There are so many types of fire responses that I didn't even realize existed. So that's really helpful. One of the questions I had was on private property and community public outreach that you have planned. And how do you already have a plan of how that looks, how we can reach renters and Spanish-speaking residents as well, with some basic educational vegetation management information, storage of items, etc.?
Yeah, that's a great question, council member. And I'm glad you asked it because, first of all, the sort of depth that we go to in terms of the calls we respond to, it continues to grow, but so does the call volume itself. I think I have some data, but like over the last 10 years, we've seen a 31% increase, and over the last 20 years, so I've been here 23, 24 years, we've seen an over 52% increase in calls. So the variety of calls continues to expand. It's not just fires and EMS, but of course we are in the water rescue world now. And of course, we do a lot now, even with the police department, when it comes to active shooter and those types of events. So what we ask the fire department staff to do is extremely challenging, and I'm super proud of what they do every single day. And they never cease to amaze me in terms of what they're capable of doing. And so I think it's just important to note that not only are the calls themselves and the variety expanding, but the call volume itself is. And I just want to keep that at the forefront as we continue to work collaboratively together in this group of finding solutions that we're definitely going to have to, one of my jobs is to look at solutions to expanding our services and the equipment that we have and the staffing that we have so that we can meet those needs, but also preserving the workforce that we currently have. To answer your question about outreach, I did get a request, and it's, again, one of those things that started organically. We did a town hall with Prospect Heights sort of after that De La Viega fire that we had in August of last year. There was a lot of confusion and concern about our evacuation communication method. We have made a lot of progress in that area. And so one of the an area, it was Grunwald Court. Some of those residents, I think, might not have been aware that they were in that sphere of influence of the Prospect Heights Firewise group. So I was able to make that connection. They came to this town hall, they were educated, provided some materials, and they've even asked for a subsequent follow-up just before the holiday break, asking for us to come out and sort of do another sort of talk with their neighborhood group specifically, which I've agreed to, and we'll come out, and they really want to focus on our Zone Haven, our newest tool that we have in terms of communicating our evacuation based on the neighborhood you live in, and what the emergency is, whether it's flood, fire, earthquake. And so it's something that Chief Escalante and his staff have worked with mine, and as well as we've been partnering with the county on. And so that's one of our going to be our big outreach efforts in the coming year, plural, because it's going to take a lot in terms of the PR behind that and really getting that message out, because it's going to be a great tool, but I think it's just changing people that are sort of expecting something different. They can be much more proactive, go online, know their zone is the mantra of this platform, and people can become familiar and almost save it as a bookmark. And depending on, no matter what time of year it is or what emergency, they can always go and see where their neighborhood is, sort of what level they're at, and if it's a shelter in place, or is there an evacuation order, or warning being issued. And so it's a great tool that we want to get the message out on. In terms of making sure we're making those connections to all components of our community, we have plans of working with the Beach Flats community. That was done, will be done with some staff. I have a tremendous amount of staff that are bilingual and have an interest coming from that neighborhood. As well as we did our emergency preparedness flyer. We finally got it vetted and approved and printed in Spanish. And so that was sort of our last hurdle, as well as the pandemic. And so now moving into the new year, we have the staffing and the tools available to do that outreach and education. And so it's a matter of getting it on the calendar and get out there. But I'm all ears in terms of suggestions that any other group, or sort of invitation, if you will, if any groups if they want us to come out. Again, we're limited staff, but we can get it on a schedule, and we can get out and do a talk about wildfire safety, about emergency preparedness, or even just basic fire safety as a whole, because it runs the gamut of sort of community risk reduction. Did that answer your question?
Yes, that's wonderful. Thank you. And I'm happy to hear about the emergency preparedness. That I remember when that was started. So I'm glad that was able to be translated and available in Spanish and English. And I'm glad you brought up Zone Haven. It's my first experience with it was recently with all the shelter in place evacuation warnings. And so I'm glad that is still part of it. And I wonder if there is some work being done around district town halls, and it's still in process. So my thought is that might also be an opportunity to include general update from fire on all of these topics in those district town hall meetings. One option. also, do you have your own how do you communicate? I know PD, we have a communications person with PD and a team under the city manager's office. How does that work, your communications?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Going back to first your point about, I would love to either personally or have some of my staff participate in those district outreach, because I think we had so much success with that Prospect Heights neighborhood town hall that I think, we actually were able to have 2 laptops, and I was able to project onto the screen as we did a test and, showed people what it looks like and what information is available. And so I think that was a great opportunity to share that platform and its benefits real time with those folks. And so I think we can do that on a larger scale with those various districts, because it sort of allows us to connect with, smaller groups, but it has much more of an impact. The other question that you had, I'm sorry, refresh my memory.
I'm going to move on to a different topic quickly with my next question. But I think that you answered my original question.
You asked about outreach too, and we don't have a dedicated person like PD. We have our fire prevention specialist who does all the scheduling for fire prevention. She will do some communication on social media platforms, but I don't have any staff dedicated to that. It's sort of, I act as an ad hoc PIO when I'm contacted by the press. When I need help, and most recently I've been working with city manager's office, Erica Smart, on a campaign for Know Before You Go water safety for the upcoming summer season. So That's been my mechanism for outreach, since we don't have a dedicated person for that.
I guess, and maybe this has already been covered. I'm new to this committee, but maybe for a future agenda, it would be nice to see a list of what your wish list needs of solutions and would be, what you think would be helpful in supporting your department and public safety topics. And so, yeah, and I don't know if that's come up before, but that might be helpful for future.
I agree. I think that would be great.
Sounds good.
Did you have any? If you don't have any more questions, I have a couple questions. Okay, so I just wanted to say also thank you, and it was a really great presentation. I really like what were the brochures called that you said? That
emergency preparedness flyer.
Emergency preparedness, yeah, and I thought those were fabulous, and I think handing them out and offering them to the schools was a great other way to get the word out, since we do monthly fire drills, and that's a great way to reach families as well. I was super excited to hear that you've been working on open space education, outreach, and enforcement. I think that's really amazing. I'm also really happy, and I'm going to bug Chief Escalante about this, because I think with the fire, what is the fire class that both of our kids are in, that they offer?
Oh,
through Cabrillo and the high schools. So you've got this
fire tech
class that juniors and seniors can take no matter which school they're at. Mm-hmm. And then the junior lifeguard program, it's really workforce development. And I would love to see something like this, because it's inspiring a whole group of young people to go into the fire service. I would love to see something similar with the police department, some kind of, and I don't know if we have anything like that, but I can bug you about that later, or if you have, but I just wanted to, compliment the department on making that happen. I also was wondering about, for those open space fires, you said they're all human caused. Mm-hmm. How many are, let's get real. How many are caused by encampments and homeless populations? Do you have a sense?
I'd have to do a deeper dive into that sort of heat map, but of I think it was 144 last year. Mm-hmm. I would say over 75% are at encampment sites, because what we do with our data collection is, as crews encounter them by way of either, walking and doing outreach with PD support, or when they go out on a response call, correct? So they might go out on a medical, but notice that there's either a propane heat lamp, a barbecue, a fire, any sort of ignition source. And so what we've done with IT is create this app where we can take photos of those ignition sources and classify them. And that's what allows us to create that map that you saw. And so to answer I think I'm being generous with 75%, but I'd say it's well above that. There's only a few that would be, that I'm walking down the trail and I'm smoking out of a pipe or, discarded cigarette. The most are going to be what we've seen is those ignition sources like barbecue pits, camping stoves, fire pits, propane heaters. Generators are a huge one. And we've even seen a few that involve solar panels and, charging of batteries, car batteries and that type of thing. So I think to answer your question, it really does revolve primarily around a lot of that encampment activity.
Got it. Okay. And then in regards to vegetation management, I heard you say you collaborate with other departments, including water. Is there any talk about while you're doing that vegetation management, especially around like Loch Lomond, selling some of that timber? And I don't know if it's been done. I think it's been done in past, but I don't know as a revenue source.
That's a great question. And I would have to defer, a lot of it, I will say from my experience, and I'm not a forester, but from the work and things that I've done with Leslie Keaty and the biologist and the staff up at Loch Lomond is, you're dealing with a lot of diseased timber, by the bark beetle or other sort of infestations. And so I don't know what is still, usable. There have been some projects when we were in Pogonip. Specifically, we had to fell some large trees that became a public hazard for falling. I don't know if they were sold, but they are usable large trees. They're not. I don't think they're sold to any large, company timber company per se. But that would be probably a good question for me to follow up with Slim and the water staff up there.
Because it was two different people that asked me that question in the last few months. Okay. And then my last question for you is, after speaking to others in your department, I was told that there's a limited shelf life to a lot of your apparatus, fire trucks, engines, whatnot, and they're kind of all coming to the end of their life. And it might be and so I brought this up at budget, but do you feel okay that we've got a plan moving forward for replacing your equipment?
Yeah. We did reach an agreement with Central Fire where they supplied us an engine for 2 days. And that was by way of, supply chain issues, not only with procuring new equipment, but even getting parts. And a lot of that has been addressed. The supply chain in some ways is catching up. The mechanic staff, we contract with Central Fire. They have a shop in Capitola, and they do apparatus work for the majority of the county. They have since sort of caught up and been able to get these parts. But to answer your question specifically, we last year we were able to get a ladder truck, which was, we were coming up on its life cycle. We had an engine already in the queue from the previous budget year. And then we were able to get another one that's coming in March of this year. And so the short answer is yes, we're catching up, and we're reestablishing a plan that unfortunately prior to my tenure in this position was suspended, if you will. And I couldn't explain exactly why. I think a lot of it had to do with finances, but I think it was the turnover between finance and fire. And, I think as we move forward, and I think one of the shining silver lining that we have here with our new finance director is she came from Napa, and myself and Chief Young have experience working with the fire department in Napa, and they have a very robust and resilient apparatus replacement program that Elizabeth is intimately aware and knowledgeable of. And so we've said, hey, we want to mirror and mimic this moving forward. And so she's on board. And I think, like I mentioned, or I think Matt did in the city council meeting, that he's well aware of it. He's on board, and so is Elizabeth. And so while I think we're just catching up, I think we have a pretty good plan moving forward.
Perfect. And I see Sonia has another question. I have one final question, and that is there something that Councilmember Bruner, I as council people can do to support you or the fire department? And is there stuff that the members of the community can do to also help support the fire department?
I think really being proactive and becoming parts of like Firewise neighborhoods and being advocates for those groups. Because, as we saw with the floods and the flood potential and any wildland fire, we and PD and fire can't do it alone. So having sort of active partners and people who are proactive in the community is helpful. So you guys are great platforms for us to sort of speak out to the community and make that connection. And again, sharing for the fire specifically, sharing those flyers and directing people to our website for additional information is great. And of course, turning people to me, as the representative of the fire department is great. And so I think just having people become more active participants in fire safety as a whole is great. But a lot of that has to do with us, but we don't know those that may have a need or a desire to have us come out. So I think it's just people reaching out to us and making that connection. And then of course, us holding up our end of the bargain and coming out and again, creating and curating those relationships.
Thank you very much. And I'll turn it back over to Sonia.
Thank you. Good questions. My other question was, we received several emails from the public, and one of the questions that I just wanted to say thanks for responding to me, but maybe you could talk a little bit more. It was specifically around the EMS medical emergency calls. And of that amount, the question was how many were drug overdose related. And you had mentioned something about currently the way that it is it would have to go through like patient care records. There's not really an ability to capture that, but you have some way to capture that going forward. There's a new field or something getting added. And so maybe if you could just briefly touch on that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I wanted to make sure we address that question because early on when I got it, I think right around the new year, I asked my staff to look into it because I do remember that we did look into a question related or revolving around the benchland specifically, but it didn't go into the weeds as much as overdoses. But what I do have is in a time period, basically since let's just use the benchlands because that was the focus of the question. In that time, we had I think it was just in a year, 140 EMS calls. And so that's easier to capture, right? Because it's either a fire or EMS. And so we had 140 just in the 137 San Lorenzo or Dakota is the San Lorenzo Park. And then of course, 701 Ocean Street. That's how we were able to target that. We weren't, you can't go benchlands into our system and it punches it out. We have to use an actual address. And so we use 137 Dakota as the address or 701 Ocean Street, because that's a lot of where these calls are generated and how it's sort of documented. And so we had 140 in that 1 year. Of those, we were able to do an estimate, and I want to be very clear that this is an estimate because we do not have the mechanism in place that of the 140, there was at least 60, if not more, that were an overdose in that same area. And I say that only because we were able to I was able to have some staff take a look at a sampling of just those 140 calls that we pulled out for a different inquiry and basically had to go through the narratives because again, it's not some sort of way that we can easily pull this data. Go through the narratives of each report of these 140 reports and was able to get me a rough estimate of 60 plus calls. But to the bigger issue or the question of how do we collect that data, that a lot of that information resides in our county patient care record system, which is run by county EMS. We are, sort of the customers or end users, if you will. And so there is no mechanism currently in place where they capture that. Basically, you'd have to go into all those calls that are unknown medical, man down. There's a couple other categories. But like I mentioned in my email response to you the other day was, that would then sort of only allow us to narrow it down to, thousands of calls. And then again, we'd have to then look at the narratives of all those calls. And so we just don't have the staff. But the best way forward is for us in our fire reporting system that we control, that our company officers, the captains, complete on every call, is that there's a checkbox that basically we have checkboxes for a variety of different things that we basically incorporate one of those into the software. And so that when we generate these reports, there's an easy mechanism for us to gather that information. I think not only just based on our unhoused community, but just because the opioid crisis is so rampant and such a big issue, not only locally but statewide and nationwide, that I think it is important for us to capture that. And so that is something that we will be putting into our fire reporting system, which is called emergency reporting. Big surprise. But again, I appreciated that question because it is something that we should definitely want to focus on as we do extra work, with the county and the city in terms of making sure that we, again, make the community safe and really understand the risk of the opioid crisis and how it affects various parts of our community.
Yes, thank you. I think that would be helpful data. And I wonder if county health collects any data on those stats on their end. And did your team, when they respond, do they administer Narcan? Is that something?
Yes.
Is that also another way to kind of roughly collect data, right? If Narcan was administered. That's again going through the patient care record, because the fire reporting system doesn't deal with the patient care part of it, because some of that is HIPAA protected. I see.
So we can get the data, but there are times too that it is within the treatment protocol that we give Narcan, because it is a very benign drug, but it is very effective if you are in fact under the influence of an opioid. But if we go on, I'm just going to use that as an example. Someone is in full cardiac arrest. We don't know why. We give them those cardiac drugs, but we'll also check their blood sugar and we'll give them Narcan because, depending on the situation, where they're at, their medical history, it may warrant giving them that, but doesn't necessarily mean that the end result was caused by an overdose. So while it is a great tool, it's not as reliable as us creating a specific field to collect that data.
Great, thank you.
If that concludes your questions, do you need a motion, M, for us to accept the report?
No motion is needed, but to take this to public comment.
Okay, so if anyone would like to make a comment on or has questions about item 3, annual fire emergency service report, you can push *9 or raised hand feature. Okay, I'm not seeing any, so let's go ahead. Thank you very much, Chief Odie, and we'll go ahead and move on to Chief Escalante with item 4, summary report, use of force, citizens, complaints, and staffing from September through December 2022.
Okay, thank you. Em, you have the PowerPoint, I believe.
Yes, I do. Just a second. I will be sharing the data sheet part with the PowerPoint real quick. Is this the correct one?
That's not the PowerPoint. I mean, that is all the data I'll be sharing, but
no problem. Let me pull up the other. Okay. Great.
There we go. Okay, so I'm going to cover the crime stats for the entire year, and then I'll get into some of the other details like staffing. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So we're going to start with the crime stats for all of 2022. Next slide. Okay, so here is a comparison going all the way back to 2019. You will see that the total number of arrests for the year were down by 8%, as well as calls for service had gone down by 7%. Both of these numbers have kind of trended downward, but I think, you do have to consider the effects of COVID. And so the comparisons are from the previous year. Obviously, the last year to almost 2 years, the numbers are going to be significantly, I think, affected by the effects of COVID. So you'll see that our reports written are relatively the same as last year, the last 2 years. Traffic citations are slightly up from the year before, or slightly up from the last 2 years. I'm hoping that's a result of us implementing a couple more traffic-focused officers on the motorcycles. More of the criminal citations is almost in line with last year's, but still down from 2019 and 2020. Adult arrests are down slightly, and you'll see calls for service. I do want to reiterate that or emphasize that the calls for service, I continue to kind of study why the trend is the way it is. I don't necessarily have a scientific explanation. We are looking into what I had requested was numbers that are going to show self-initiated calls for service versus community-initiated calls for service. And my guess is due to our staffing shortages, we're going to see a significant dip in calls for service that are self-initiated. And that's what I'm really striving for as we become better staff, that we have more staff that's out there able to do more self-initiated work versus just being reactive all the time, being able to do more proactive work. Next slide. Okay, again, I think we always share the calls for service by priority. I compared these numbers to last year. They are relatively the same. You'll see the level 1 priority calls is 7%. I think last year it was 8%. Level 2 calls is 1%. Level 3, and you'll see the graph on the right-hand side there. It sort of describes how NetCom categorizes the different priority of calls for service. Obviously, the majority of our calls for service are in 7, 8, and 9, or 4 is pretty large as well. Next slide. Okay, so here you're going to see the violent crime rate, which was overall an 8% increase in 2022. Obviously, homicides were significantly down, but we really don't look at that because we thankfully have so few of those, knock on wood, that just 1 or 2 makes a significant percentage change. So you'll see again the comparative numbers from all the way back to 2019. And once again, I think that 2020 and 2021 are tough numbers to compare. I tend to have more value or see more value in comparing 2019 numbers because of COVID. Next slide. You'll see an overall 7% increase in property crimes. Again, there's an effect with COVID. As I look at some of these numbers and compare them more to 2019, the numbers are better. However, we're comparing these numbers to the previous year, so there is a 7% increase. I would add that I know we publish our UCR crime data every quarter. In the last quarter of 2022, we had a 9% decrease in violent crime and a 10% decrease in property crime just for the last quarter of 2022. So I'm hoping that we're gonna see that continue to trend downward. Next slide. The committee's always asked for a report out on nuisance crimes. you'll see a significant decrease in the nuisance crime arrests and citations. Obviously, the illegal camping citations is not quite as applicable these days as it once was. This might be something that the committee looks at as far as recrafting what they're looking for. But here are the numbers. As far as a decrease in drug abuse violations, intoxication, vandalism remains about the same. And then the aggressive solicitation. And I think some of these, especially like conduct on public property citations that are significantly down. I believe that some of this has to do with the lack of our foot patrol beats down in our downtown district, where we see a lot of these sort of nuisance crimes that used to be, I think, more heavily enforced with foot patrol officers in our downtown. Next slide. So some of the activity report I'd like to share. Go ahead, next slide, which will include some staffing. Here's our staffing update as of, about an hour ago today. It's a constant moving number. But again, we are budgeted for 94 positions. We're currently at 82. So that leaves us with 12 vacancies. Part of the 82, 8 of those 82 are in the field training program. We just had one graduate the field training program last night. He is now out as a solo beat officer. We have 4 in 2 different police academies still. I'm sorry, we have, I believe, 4 in 3 different academies. We just had hired a lateral from Maui PD. He needs to go to a 1-month post-certified academy instead of a 6-month academy. And he will be in the field training program after that 1 month. So I'm hoping for a successful fast track on that one. We still have 8 officers that are out on injury. I think that this year we have made some progress on those that had long-term injuries that ended up retiring out medically. Those bodies have not prevented us from hiring, but it was nice to kind of clear the way for us to hire new officers that will be out in the field hopefully sooner than any of those ones that were out injured. It was significant injuries. So in essence, that leaves us with 62 available sworn officers, whether as detectives or in patrol. And that puts us at a 66% capacity, which I believe probably around the beginning of the year, we were in the upper 50 percentile range. So we have seen and made some progress and seen some success there. Next slide. I'd like to also recognize that we have made significant progress on our informal and formal investigations. We fell, as you know, significantly behind. We made an incredible push in the calendar year 2022 and completed a total of 87, both informal and formal investigations. Most of those were completed by a simple review of the body-worn camera footage, and it was clear that the allegations had not occurred. And so I had made the decision there was no need to extend a lot of effort into an extensive investigation when everything was right there on the body-worn camera footage. So those cameras have really come in handy, more in our defense than anything. So you'll see, as far as the formal investigations, we had 19 of the 87 were formal investigations. And I believe we have maybe 2 or 3 cases from 2022 left, including the recent officer-involved shooting, which is obviously in 2023. But we have finally cleared our plate from 2019, 2020, and 2021 cases, which we were still backlogged. So we've made a lot of progress there. Next slide. As we are required by ordinance, here is our report out on the use of the Bearcat. We deployed it obviously multiple times, more times than not, to other agencies in the county than our own. We deployed it to the school, the threat of a school shooting up at Santa Cruz High. It was deployed out to Scotts Valley for an incident involving a pursuit where the suspects fired a weapon at the officers that were pursuing the vehicle. The assist to Salinas PD was, I believe, the incident involving the officer-involved death, where they were shot. Had one warrant service. It went out. Again, we tracked this the moment it leaves the back police lot. So it went out once for maintenance. It was taken out twice for training. I'm not quite sure the incidents on the department, the sheriff's office incidents, or the Watsonville incidents. And then we took it to get gas 3 times. It needs fuel. Next slide. Some of the areas to just speak about as far as 2022, we spent a significant amount of staff time refining our way of collecting the what we call RIPA data, or Racial and Identifying Profiling Act requirement. That takes significant staff time after every single stop, and we've continued to do that as required throughout the year. We upgraded our in-car cameras and computer systems, which now our in-car cameras are the same system that our body-worn cameras are, and so the system all syncs together really nicely. Implemented the priority dispatching for service. Basically what that is our dispatchers can tell where the patrol vehicles are located, and they don't necessarily dispatch the officer that's assigned to that beat. They will, if it's a priority call, they will dispatch that unit that is closest to the incident. Where that also comes in handy is sometimes we have other law enforcement agencies in our jurisdiction, such as going to the jail. If there is an armed robbery occurring at Water and Ocean Street, let's say, and a sheriff's deputy just left the jail, it makes most sense to let them know, hey, there's an armed robbery right down the street as you're leaving the jail, and then we respond and ultimately take over the incident. But that's how that priority dispatch system works. We made some improvements and tried to really highlight how individuals can provide feedback on our website. We also changed, at the recommendation of the auditor, we changed the name of the form to a community feedback form instead of a citizen complaint form. We hired a total of 26 officers in 2022. Not all 26 passed the academy or the field training program. I believe we ended up with about 20. But that's a significant amount. It's great progress. It comes with pros and cons. You have some young officers out there, but you also have an opportunity to create a culture as well. Which I think I know I'm very excited about, and we continue to work on that. We participated in the National Night Out event. We conducted a public safety teen academy for the first time, probably before COVID, in partnership with the fire department. We brought back the Citizens Academy, which I'd love to add the Spanish Citizens Academy next calendar year, or this calendar year. And we continue to, do our Code Red training at the local schools, and we are partnering with all the agencies since the incident at Santa Cruz High, we saw areas for improvement as a county and county law enforcement. So we're getting together a group from all different agencies and different school districts to just even get better. And so that's always a work in progress. Next slide. I guess that might be all I got for you.
Just real quick, Commissioner Boulder, before we move forward, to clarify, this presentation covers both items number 4 and 5. All the data is included in there.
I don't hear who that was or what they were saying. Was that you, Em?
Yes.
I couldn't hear what you were saying.
Oh, you can hear what I was saying. So just to clarify the presentation, it covers both items number 4 and 5.
Both finance and what?
And number 4 and 5. So
that was items 4 and 5. Oh, got it. Okay. Thank you. Yes. Okay, great. Awesome. All right. So I'll turn it over to Councilmember Bruner. Do you have any questions? I'll let you go first if you do.
We'll let you go first this time.
Thank you. Okay. So thank you so much, Chief Escalante, for the comprehensive report. I have to commend you and your staff and anybody who helped assist in mutual aid for that day at Santa Cruz High. It was extremely traumatic for me as a parent. My daughter was there, and as a principal here at Bayview, having to go into lockdown. And I felt that the communication and the professionalism and the thoroughness of the whole situation really, although it was a cruel hoax, makes me really have a lot of confidence in the capability of our department. So I really want to thank you for that.
I appreciate that. I do have to recognize, an incident like that, there is no way we have the capacity to handle that alone. And it just took so many different people stepping up, from the city schools to the county office of education. Because the county office of education pretty much ran the reintroduction component down here at Depot Park back to their families, right? So it just takes it's a huge lift, and so that's why we continue to train with our county partners. But thank you.
Poor Chief Odie was locked down at Bayview in one of the kindergarten classes, giving one of his outreach presentations. So he was here with me. A couple of things that I noted. I saw that you have, and it kind of blew my mind, 88,248 calls for service. And that was actually down. So when I did the math real quick, 241 calls per day. So like roughly 10 per hour. How many officers do you have out responding to those calls? And how long do those calls typically last? So I'm thinking that you're not only understaffed, but are you also over, being stretched thin? I don't know how to articulate that any better than that.
Yeah, I that's a real valid question, and I haven't done the analysis on it, but we talked about that internally as far as although the calls for service are down, I wonder if calls per officer today are much higher than they were, let's say, 5 years ago when we were higher or better staffed. It's kind of like the old, how many officers per capita, sort of ratio. I haven't done the math on that, but that's, although the calls for service are down, the argument I believe is that each officer isn't doing necessarily less work. But as I mentioned, I believe they have less opportunity to do proactive work. And that's what we're hoping to build back. So, based off of the staffing numbers, to answer your question, we have 62 today. We have 62 sworn officers. I think there's probably 8 or 9 in investigations. So you subtract that, and now you're at about 53. And those 53 are spread out throughout the 6 different shifts. So it would be an interesting, stat to run.
Well, I was just thinking, and I don't know how long a typical call lasts, but it seems like a lot of work. And I just wonder, I know we're down 12 officers, but is there and the population of our town can fluctuate greatly on weekends and during the summer. And I'm wondering, is there a national average that is, to keep communities safe? Like even if we were at that 12, do you feel like we have enough officers, or would you appreciate more or think that the community would need more to keep a community like ours safe?
One of the things that we have discussed is an actual staffing study. And I don't think we actually have ever done an official staffing study. I can tell you when I started 25 years ago, we were budgeted for 102 officers. And I can tell you 25 years ago, we did not have not only the volume of calls, we didn't have the complexity of the calls that we have today. But police officers are expensive, no doubt, right? There's a lot of other factors. I think we continue to add housing. I think that the university has gotten much larger, and those are all strains on our department or public safety in general, right? And I think Chief Odie and I have these sort of conversations about, the city is getting bigger, but our agencies haven't necessarily been able to keep up with that. So definitely valuable conversation around those
So
numbers.
if I were to ask you the same question, how we can help, one thing would be a staffing study, it sounds like, of that. Okay. And then because I did take note too that there was only 2 park violations, and like I walked through the benchlands. I could have, if I had a ticket book and was sworn, I could have given out hundreds. And so I'm thinking the same thing as you. They're too busy kind of doing triage mode with the calls that they have, that they don't have time for proactive policing. And so that makes me think that there's, not only the 12, but it would be, from my perspective, better for morale, burnout, and on those sorts of things to have more officers. Looks like Chief Odie's raising his hand. Maybe he has something to add.
Yeah, I thank you for the opportunity. And I wanted to go back because I think you brought up a good point. And so did Chief Escalante in terms of what you guys can do. And I know when you talk about the impact the university has, one thing that I was asked early on from the city attorney's office is, with the lawsuit over the development plans they had, was one of the contingencies or things that I asked was a standards of coverage survey. I don't know if that's the same thing in the world of law enforcement, but that's just sort of where are we at and where are we going? It gives us sort of a path, a prescribed path based on projected growth. In this case, the university, and sort of what they would be on the hook for. And their influence isn't just up on the Hill, it's over on the west side too. So Long Marine Lab and the Texas Instruments facility or campus are all areas where as they expand, the calls for service increase for both fire and police. Mm-hmm. And it's really, the other piece that's really hard to collect data on and articulate is the housing impact and those students that are off campus, and then of course create a call for police and fire. And so that was one ask that I had, and it's one that I'm continuing to look for like future budgets, is some funding for a standards of coverage survey for a consultant to come out and say, do you have adequate staffing now and in the future? Do you have the right equipment? Do you have stations in the right places? Do you need a training center? So I just wanted to make sure I use this opportunity to speak to you and Councilmember Brunner just about, sort of advocating for that. I think both for Chief Escalante and myself, because whether it's just the city and as we're growing and developing as one entity, or we're also looking at the university and their influence and their impact. I think advocating for those types of surveys to make sure that we are providing adequate resources, staffing, and otherwise for public safety is going to be huge for us. So I wanted to make sure that I dovetailed onto that comment.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We've actually all just got recent the chancellors reached out to all of us for meetings coming up in the next couple of months. So it'll be something to discuss there as well.
Awesome.
Thanks. And then I guess my last thing I already sort of said was the pipeline for workforce development. And I was so happy to see you had those two additions that you mentioned, that what was it, the teen public safety and the and the other one was the citizens police, and you're planning to do Spanish. Anything else that you've thought of that would potentially help with workforce development with our local kids?
Yeah, I am a part of the criminal justice board at Cabrillo College. I believe it's still called Cabrillo College. And I work with Dr. Charles as far as developing the students that are serious about the career and developing them and helping them through the process of getting hired. I also feel like we have a great community service officer program that has frequently resulted in subjects becoming, officers, as well as a great volunteer program. We actually have a community service officer right now, and she is in training, but she started here as a volunteer. So those are definitely great recruiting tools for us to pick from. But I do like to talk about my involvement at the Cabrillo College program, because I think that's another great pond to fish from, I guess, as far as the local talent.
I wondered too if you could ask them because that class that Chief Odie's son and my daughter are in is run through Cabrillo, and it's with city schools. Is there a class that could be offered for high school students? Because it's a class, I don't know, they used to be called ROP. I think they're called something else now, but the kids get both high school and college credit, and it's a year-long class that they take, and it's taught by one of our Santa Cruz firefighters. And it's just, I think, a cool way to, before kids even younger, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there's any opportunity for that. And then I guess I thank you. And aside from the staffing study, is there something else that we can do as citizens or as council members that would help the police department?
Well, I think one is regarding the recruiting, and I tell this to all community members, is if you come across a young kid that is graduating high school, graduating college, I really think that having local kids stay here and police in the community that they were raised in, I believe that the community would get so much value out of that. There's a real connection when maybe your partner or your significant other works in this community. Your kids go to school in this community. It is so much different, I think, the product out in the field when there's that local connection. So I know that all of council is out and about all 7 days a week in the community. And when you come across that bright young star, and they're interested in public safety, I would ask you send them my way or to Chief Odie's way, because local, I think the end result is such a higher quality and really the passion in the community. The other thing is, I believe that we unfortunately have had the biggest turnover rate in any department within the city. And I think that just becomes difficult to be competitive with the other agencies in this county, when I would say we do a lot more work and a lot more. We handle a lot more complex problems than some of the other jurisdictions in our county. So if the pay is the same with some of these other jurisdictions that respond to not even a third of the calls, it's really hard to I guess convince that person not to leave when they're going to get paid the same and do a third of the work. I'm not saying we need to be or will ever be competitive with Over the Hill, but at least be more competitive with the other agencies within the county. and keep people here locally. That's where we've really fallen behind is the retention, and people right around 4, 5, 6 year mark, they either leave the profession or they leave to go to a different agency.
All right, thank you. Sorry, Sonia, I asked so many questions. I'll turn it over to you now.
Good questions. Thank you. Thank you, Chief Escalante. Kind of continuing on with the staffing question. I wonder if you ever also break down by community service officer versus police officer. I'm a strong supporter of the community service officer program as well as the police volunteer program. I think all of the presence and the roles they play are different, and they're equally valuable in different ways. And I don't know if there's any kind of data that captures, the impact or what they do. Some of it may overlap because I know community service officers can issue citations. But when we talk about staffing and budgeting, and I know that we've been working on this retention and analyzing all of these topics that were brought up. I think these programs are important to support as well. And so any data at a future time, if you don't have that now, might be interesting to see. I don't know. I don't know if it's been provided before. If you have a way to.
When you say data, like around data showing volunteers or CSOs that become police officers, or just their stats, I guess.
Yeah, I guess that would all come if there was some type of survey or analysis done, but all of that in terms of their impact, their shifts, how many CSOs, how many citations, how many of those citations were written by CSOs? You need more CSOs versus police officers, or, and the role with, the volunteer program. I don't know how to capture their data, but they're equally important. And I know, all downtown Santa Cruz as an example, since I work in downtown, we have the kind of ordinances, for example, no smoking on Pacific Avenue, no wheels like skateboarding or bicycles on the sidewalks. And the police volunteers, when they are on walking on foot, they're equally effective and address those types of ordinance violations. And I just wonder if there's a way to capture both of those programs versus regular officers.
Yeah, that's a good point. I could tell you that we currently are budgeted for 15 community service officers, and we have 9.
Okay.
But we have one that just got out of training, and we have 2, and I mentioned one of them, a former volunteer. We have 2 that are in training. So we're still building that up, and certainly I think just the community service officers are incredibly valuable. I can tell you also that just because this number's been thrown around recently, our volunteers put in over 4,300 hours of logged service time in 2022, which is an incredible number, and I would bet it's probably on the lower end of what they actually did. But yeah, that's a lot of free volunteer service in our community that should be commended.
Yes. Okay. I was in a neighborhood neighborhood safety meeting in Midtown yesterday, and one of the business owners also complimented the volunteer program and the effects that she has seen. She has a business both downtown and in Midtown, and really appreciated their presence downtown. So I'm passing that on, and I will move on to my next question. And I'm, again, because I'm new to this committee, and I'm seeing fire and police reports here. Is this something you do annually to this committee, these reports? And I'm wondering where and if it might be appropriate to include other department areas, such as CRISP reports, like syringe reports, pedestrian hazards that have been reported, traffic concerns that have been reported through CRISP. I know there's bike or pedestrian hazard, roadways, sidewalks, those types of public safety hazard. Maybe an annual CRISP report might be interesting, or I don't know if that's been explored or done. And also working downtown, I know, also speaking to people in the public, behavioral health impacts, and I know some of it falls under your nuisance arrests and citations, but specifically, I wonder about behavioral health reports from the county, because there's a public safety element there. I don't know if that's been discussed or explored previously.
No, I
And
think,
how
well, especially with CRISP, I think that CRISP might be a result of the little dip in our calls for service. I think that app has probably saved a number of calls for services. Public Works, I believe, is the one that manages that and then disseminates the calls. So we don't necessarily have the data. I'm sure we could get it. Same thing with like needles, right? There's a lot of people, whether it's in Parks and Rec, whether it's Public Works, we aren't the ones that are solely responding to those. But, if that was something that the Public Safety Committee wanted and was going to focus on, I'm sure we could find a way to collect that data.
Yeah, and I wasn't suggesting that it come from you, Chief Escalante. I'm bringing this up as I see these as outside of fire and police. Mm-hmm. So seeing fire and police reports here, and I just was trying to think of public safety issues in the city and what else falls under that we may want to consider in the future. And I know there's overlap with some of your reports, but those were just some of my thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. I was just thinking that we also get a report every year from our county mental health liaisons, and they, outline how many calls that they've been on and a number of, how many people they were able to reference into housing or some other means of success, I guess. So I typically get to see that data, once a year as well, which is all around what you're talking about related to public safety.
And then my next question is also, I asked Chief Odie, and it's for you, Chief Escalante, and Councilmember Golder kind of roughly asked the same question. But I wonder if we could maybe see on maybe the May agenda, a wish list needs of solutions, some type of list of what your department would need besides what was mentioned, or including what was mentioned today.
Yeah, I would be willing to put something together.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, I guess we could take it out to public comment. If anybody has any comments or would like to say anything, you can raise. Oh, we have a raised hand.
We have Big Joe, 77.
Okay,
Let me,
does he get 3 minutes?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay. Thank you for calling.
Priority calls. This one? Okay.
No, that's not correct. We do respond to those. No, that does occur as well, and that would probably land on some of these calls, but not all of these calls.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. That you too. So
If you don't mind, I'll comment to that.
Okay.
I am very aware of the CPSM study, and it did not give us a clear picture of number of officers related to calls for service or population. It did get into the weeds of property and evidence handling and a door lock here that needed to be fixed or a light bulb here that needed to be fixed, but it really failed in as far as an analysis, like you talked about, like a nationwide, what are the numbers per capita sort of thing, and it didn't touch on that. So, but I am aware of that study, and but it didn't really meet the mark there, and that is the only thing, the closest thing to a staffing study, and why I said that we've never done one, because that one really did not paint a clear picture for us.
all right. Well, thank you. And I think, do you need a motion on goals, M?
This is all informative.
Okay. And then is there any informational items that we need to cover?
There are not.
Okay. And so I think with that, we can adjourn this evening's public safety meeting. And I really appreciate everybody's time and the thoughtful presentations and the great comments and questions.
Thank you.
Have a good evening, everybody. I don't even have to speed. I'll make it on time to my next meeting.
Thank
Bye.